Hello, good evening. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for spending your evening doing some peace and justice stuff with us. My name is Hakim Williams. I'm director of the Peace and Justice Studies program here at Gettysburg College, and I'm involved in a host of other programs here at Gettysburg College. I am so happy that alumni have returned to share their expertise and their knowledge with all of us. We have alumni all over the world. So when you graduate, know that you will be joining a wonderful, rich community. And so I am going to hand it off to Bryn, who is one of the co-vice presidents of the Peace and Justice Student Council. Have a good evening.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for the fourth session in this year's Peace and Justice Week. This program is called Peace and Justice Alumni Doing Great Work. So we have 5 panelists with us tonight who will be answering questions about how their peace and justice interests led them to where they are now. Moderating tonight's event is Christina Noto, who graduated from Gettysburg in 2019. Christina majored in history and minored in both women, gender, and sexuality studies and peace and justice studies. After graduation, Christina completed the capital teaching residency through KIPP DC, where she got her teaching certification. Christina currently works for KIPP DC as a 2nd through 4th grade science teacher, and she's hoping to go back to school in a few years to get an interdisciplinary PhD in peace studies. So without further ado, Christina will take it away and introduce all of our panelists, and then we will get rolling with a question and answer session.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bryn, and thank you all so much for being here tonight. I am really honored to be here, be invited by the Peace and Justice Student Council. As you can see, this is my virtual classroom, so welcome to science class with Ms. Noto. When I had agreed to moderate this panel, I was hoping that we would be in person, but here we are. I do want to note that I have a separate screen up, so I am looking at you, but it's a double monitor. So thank you all for being here tonight. I know times are very difficult, and I do really appreciate you choosing to be here. I hope you and your families are safe and well. I do want to acknowledge that 2020 and the beginning of 2021 has been really difficult. There's obviously so much more I could say about it, but I also recognize that our topic for this panel is careers in peace and justice, and I want to respect our panelists and your time as well. Before I introduce the panelists, I would like to go over some norms for the evening. So there are 6 people on the panel. I will ask questions until around 7 p.m. and then from 7 to 7:15, I will give students an opportunity to ask questions. If you do have any questions, feel free to private message me or Bryn in the chat with your questions. In order to keep the event engaging, I have encouraged the panelists to keep each answer brief and exact, and not every panelist will answer every question. So if you do want a panelist to answer a question, just send me a message in the chat, like if they didn't get to it. If you're able to, please consider turning on your camera. It would be wonderful to see you and to create a community in this space. Please remain on mute so we can hear the panelists. And finally, before I introduce everyone, I would like to utilize the chat. So if everyone can just take a moment to say who you are and where you're coming from today. And while you all do that, I'm going to spotlight the panelists. And Emma. Awesome. Great. Thank you all so much. So if you all can, just send a message in the chat. Who are you and where are you coming from tonight? I'm going to get started reading our panelist bios. Okay, so Noor Oweis, she graduated from Gettysburg College in 2011 with a BA in Globalization Studies and a minor in Peace and Justice Studies. She is currently serving as a U.S. diplomat in the Consular section at the American Institute in Taiwan. Rhiannon Winter works at USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, supporting the grant-making process and award management for NGOs and UN agencies in Ethiopia and Kenya. She is also pursuing her MPH in Community Health Science part-time at Tulane University. Thank you all so much for the messages in the chat. I love seeing where all of you are coming from. Rachael Ward serves as a development project associate for the Community Builders Incorporated's North Atlantic region. Ward oversees real estate projects through all stages of their life cycles, from feasibility through occupancy. Ms. Ward holds a master's in public policy from Georgetown University's McCourt School of Public Policy. She received her bachelor's degree magna cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa from Gettysburg College in 2012. Richard Aime is a 2012 graduate of Gettysburg College with a major in political science and a minor in peace and justice studies. He has been the assistant district attorney for Northumberland County, PA since August 2019. He graduated from the University of Massachusetts School of Law in 2016. Emma Dorsheimer is a young professional who graduated in December 2020 with her master's in conflict resolution from Georgetown University. She received her BA in cultural anthropology from Gettysburg College in 2019, minoring in Spanish and peace and justice studies and focusing on human rights and applied anthropology in conflict resolution. And finally, David Byerley graduated from Gettysburg College in 2015 with an individual major and minor in peace and justice studies. He earned his JD cum laude from Catholic University of America Columbus School of Law in 2018. He currently serves as a trial attorney with the Civil Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. Byerly appears on this panel in his personal capacity only. Wow, our panelists are truly wonderful, and I'm sure they have wonderful experiences to talk to us about in terms of their careers with peace and justice. So it is time to get started. Again, thank you all so much for turning on your cameras and for engaging in the chat. Please feel free, if you're liking what something says or vibing with it, feel free to engage in the chat. Okay, so I just read your bios, which were really wonderful, but I was wondering if you all could explain, how did you get to the position that you're currently in? What steps did you take in order to get there? And anyone, feel free to answer that.
I can start. So I'm currently a consular officer. My technical title is Foreign Service Officer Generalist, which means I can be placed anywhere in the world to do any job on behalf of the State Department. And in order to become a diplomat, there's a very formal process that you go through. There are two routes. The more common is a series of exams called the Foreign Service Officer Test. The first exam is similar to the SATs or an AP test. It's on the computer. It's got multiple parts to it, including multiple choice on anything from US history to pop culture to management styles, resolution conflict, all via bubble clicking, multiple choice. And then it also includes several essays. If you pass the first portion, you're invited to submit a series of short answer narratives about yourself. You typically have 10 days to 2 weeks to turn it around and submit it to this panel. After that, the final step is an in-person all-day oral assessment that has multiple parts to it as well, that only takes place in Washington, D.C., and includes some group activities with other people who are being tested, a panel interview with the people who are examining you, as well as some simulations and some case studies. All of that, start to finish, can take a year to 2 years. After you go through all of the examination process, you have a series of security clearances and background checks and everything, which can take another year to 2 years. So my start to finish, from when I first took the exam to my first day at work, was about 2.5 years in that process. The other way that people can join the Foreign Service, there are some fellowships, and they're particularly targeted toward students who are currently in undergrad who are interested in going to graduate school. And you can go to graduate school for anything. They're called Pickering and Wrangell, and I can type them into the chat. And they're extremely competitive, but once you get into the fellowship, you get to go to whatever master's or graduate program you want. And when you graduate, you're committed to 5 years in the Foreign Service. And it's all expenses paid, full scholarship. But you do have to pass the final stage of the oral assessment exam, is the only part of the exams that overlaps with that path. Otherwise, once you graduate from your graduate degree program, you start in the Foreign Service, just like everybody who took the other path to get in, and you have a commitment of at least 5 years. And that's how you can become a diplomat.
Thank you so much. David, would you care to share how you got to where you are?
Sure. First off, I want to say that Noor's job sounds awesome. I did take the Foreign Service exam in 2019. And it was probably one of the more fun tests that I've taken. So kudos to her on that. I know that's a very selective and not an easy process. So yes, I graduated from Gettysburg in 2015. I went to law school immediately after. I knew I wanted to go to law school first day of freshman year. So it's 3 years of law school. The first one is really hard. The second one is just a lot of work. The third one is kind of where you work and go to school at the same time. Speaking of that, that is something that I did. During your first year of law school, you apply to different internships, things like that you do your first year out of law school. What I did was a little bit different than what a lot of other people did, is that they took a fairly prestigious but unpaid position after their first year of law school. Instead, what I did is I applied for a paralegal position for which I was really overqualified, but then tried to turn it into the legal internship that I always wanted. So I did that and was able to get paid, although not that much, for about 2 years. Once I graduated law school, I lost eligibility for that position. So I was more or less booted out. Took the bar exam, which I'm sure all of you have heard of. It's a very long 2-day, well, it used to be a 2-day test, involves close to 500 hours of studying. Passed that, and then I joined the Department of Labor for a year, hated it, and then went back to the same office that I worked in during law school, where I still am today as a trial attorney and civil litigator.
Thanks, David. Rachel?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I joined Teach for America right after Gettysburg, and so was pursuing the education path to really be digging into a couple different types of anti-poverty work. And I taught for 4 years and loved it, but realized that the issues that I was trying to get at were more systematic than what I was seeing in the classroom, that what I was seeing in the classroom was the root of these issues, which I was realizing I was more and more interested in, which was really economic and racial segregation. So I went to policy school, sort of started in education policy, and then realized that what I was looking for as broader anti-poverty paths was really more sort of general public policy. And from there, I found this beautiful niche, which is called community development policy, basically the way that we are looking to equalize investments in our communities across the US in the way that reverses essentially the landscape of how they have typically been done. So from public policy school, I ended up joining a nonprofit community developer of affordable mixed income housing, which is where I work today, the Community Builders. And so we do a lot of redeveloping communities in a way where we're invested in the community, invested in the changes that they want to make. And we do a lot of redeveloping public housing into mixed income communities, and a lot of trying to find areas of opportunity that need affordable housing and figuring out ways to put that there. So for me, I've sort of crossed across a couple different fields, but the work that I'm really doing today is based on what does it look like to provide choice for people where they live in terms of equalizing opportunity around place.
Thanks, Rachel. Richard, how did you get to where you are?
My path is sort of like David's too, going to law school, and then eventually taking the bar exam. During law school, though, I interned for a criminal defense attorney, just because I was interested in criminal justice, and learned a lot about the ins and outs of criminal defense work, and what that entailed. And then eventually, when I got out of law school, I was a solo practicing attorney for a couple of years in Massachusetts. I saw a couple people on the chat from Massachusetts tonight. And I was working in the juvenile court there, where I was working on cases that involved child abuse and neglect. Did not really think that fit what I wanted to do long term, and eventually looked more back into the criminal justice field and taking a position in a district attorney's office. And now I'm back in criminal justice, which is where I like to be and where I like to work. And so I'm not really too far outside my comfort zone at the moment, but it is definitely something that I've been enjoying since I got back into it.
Thanks, Richard. Rhiannon?
Sure. So I ended up falling into USAID more than specifically seeking it out. I didn't know when I graduated exactly where I wanted to go. I know that I really enjoy, I had always thought I wanted to work in government, specifically in a government agency or maybe as an aide in Congress. I had actually walked around a couple, like the Cannon Building and some other congressional buildings with my resume, going door to door to talk to different representatives and senators' offices and hope, see for the best. I didn't realize something that I've learned in the past year or two since graduating is that a lot of government workers are not actually direct hires by the US government. So for example, I actually work for a private defense contractor, but I'm embedded within USAID. I have a USAID email address. I work exclusively with other USAID employees. It's impossible to tell a difference. It's just on my paycheck. So once I learned that you could apply to different defense contractors and get in that way, I applied to the contractor I work at now, and that's how I ended up with my position. And then I know Noor talked a little bit about timeline. It was for me, about 4 months. I was able to start without a security clearance. You get it as you're processed. So I interviewed early last January, and my first day was April 27th of 2020.
Great, thank you so much. Emma, I'm going to switch it up a little bit on you. Congratulations for just graduating with your master's. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your choice to go to grad school right after graduation. How was applying to grad schools? What did that look like? And now what are you doing?
Sure. So I kind of always knew what I wanted to study when it came to undergrad. And if peace and justice studies had been a major, that would have been what I would have chosen, in addition to my anthropology major. So when it came time to think about what I wanted to do after graduation, I kind of knew that I wanted to go into this type of social justice, humanitarian aid type of field. And so it was really a no-brainer for me to choose to go to grad school right away, just because I knew that was something I wanted to learn more about and get more involved in. It's not always super typical, I think, for people to go right to grad school, but there are a lot of advantages to it. I could talk about this as well, but when it came to the application process, I felt like, for the most part, really what they want to hear from you in your applications for grad school, especially in this type of field, is they want to know how this graduate program would assist you in your career aspirations. And that's why it's really important to, if you want to go to grad school, to know why you're doing it. It shouldn't just be sort of like a on the whim type of situation. I knew exactly what I wanted to study, and that's why applying to a bunch of different grad programs in the realm of international conflict resolution made the most sense for me. But I think when it comes down to it, like, your personal statement really should reflect what you are really passionate about. For me, that kind of leads into what I'm looking to do right now, which is youth advocacy. So I wrote about how passionate I was about impacting, the future youth of America, creating leaders for change in the future. And that kind of reflects the experiences that I had during grad school and the type of work that I'm looking for right now. So like Christina said, I graduated in December 2020. So I'm a fresh grad, currently living in DC, trying to find my next opportunity. Very hard, obviously, given the current climate, but I've really loved the grad program that I chose. I went to Georgetown. They'd have an accelerated program in conflict resolution. So I actually completed it in 18 months instead of 2 years, which was great. I did take classes over the summer, which is a unique experience, also doing it online. So if anyone has any questions about that, obviously you guys are in school too, so you know some of that. But I've had a variety of different experiences looking at youth advocacy. Also, I graduated with a graduate certificate in gender, peace, and security because I am very interested in women's issues, gender issues, and advocating for those in sort of the mainstreaming of all humanitarian aid work. So that's kind of me right now. If you have specific questions about the application process, I'd be happy to address them.
Thank you so much, Emma. Richard or David, can you talk a little bit about law school and why you chose to go to law school after graduating?
So I'll go first. And before I start, I forgot to mention, and I know Christina mentioned at the top of the meeting, I appear in my personal capacity only, meaning that none of my views represent the U.S. Department of Justice, the U.S. Department of Labor, the court where I worked before that. So all of my opinions are my own. I'm not being endorsed or sponsored or anything by my employers here. So that's something I need to mention first. But in terms of my decision to go to law school, I think it was an easy one. I really wanted to be a psychiatrist, and then I figured out that I couldn't do math, and therefore that was not going to work. But law school, there's a couple kind of people who go there, and I think that there's the people who don't quite know what they want to do yet. There's the people who know kind of exactly what they want to do, and there's people who fall kind of in between. I knew I wanted to be a lawyer, but I didn't know about what or for who or in what capacity, whether I wanted to go join the Army JAG program, or if that wasn't possible, what was going to happen after that. But in terms of going to law school, I knew it was the right move for me right after college. I was ready to do the work. My professors at Gettysburg really prepared me for what to anticipate. And I knew that given what I wanted to do, it would not be possible without getting a law degree and passing the bar. So in terms of getting from A to B, this is just the line that I needed to walk. So that was kind of the impetus behind my decision. But I will say that if you choose to wait a few years, that's fine too. I mean, I've had classmates who were, in their 50s. I've had classmates who were new mothers and new fathers. I've had classmates who were younger than me just because they were savants. But there's people from all walks of life. It's never quite too late to go to law school. You just have to have kind of the energy and the time to do it.
Thank you so much, David. Richard?
I would agree with everything that David just said about law school. And I think I fell in the same sort of category of David, of knowing that I wanted to be a lawyer, but not necessarily knowing what I wanted to do until I got to law school. But it really is, law school is one of those experiences that you don't know what it is until you get into it and you get into all the work. And I also had classmates who were in their 50s. I had a couple of classmates who were in their 60s, actually. Some people were going back for a second career. I knew there were some people I did a couple night classes. I was a full-time student, but there were part-time students too who were working full-time jobs while they were going to law school at the same time. They were part-time students and they were going at night, essentially. So there is really a lot of different people that you meet in law school. And it's a really I'm apart from Gettysburg, it's probably the place where I met the most variety of different type of people that you'll ever see in the educational setting. I guess if you get out, you start to meet even more people, but it is definitely a place where it takes a lot of work. But I've seen a lot of people who have gone through it, they've done it, and they've enjoyed what they've done after they've left too. So it is a good opportunity.
Thank you so much. Rachael, Rhiannon, or Noor, can you talk a little bit maybe about if most people go to grad school right to get where you are today? Do most people go to grad school right away, or do they wait for your career specifically?
I would say in the community development field, there are a lot of people who do go to grad school right away, and usually they're people who go into either urban planning or engineering or some of those like really technical trades, and then they, after grad school, sort of figure out a way to start going broader to do community development work. For me, going to grad school was pretty essential for a career change because I was transitioning over from education, that doing a public policy program allowed me sort of the the freedom to think about, okay, what is social policy? What are these big rungs of social justice issues? And what are the ones that I'm most interested in working on and the ones that I think are really at the center of everything else? And for me, place-based opportunity is sort of the starter of everything else and where it comes from, even though lots of other people can sort of put that together a lot of different ways. For me, since I went to grad school 4 years after Gettysburg, I had a particularly young class at Georgetown. It tends to be, for their policy, a more academic, sort of data heavy program. So I had a lot of really smart classmates who were right out of undergrad and sort of data whizzes and didn't know what they wanted to do with it. They just wanted to be in data work and doing it to sort of make the world better in some way. And for me, I was pretty focused once I realized that I wanted to do community development policy. And so I was able to sort of use that in order to channel it more strongly when I got out of grad school. It was definitely different for me going to grad school and being older, and that I was working at the same time and most of my classmates weren't, and that after being a teacher for a number of years, my sort of worldview was very, in some ways academic and a lot of ways not academic. So it was a little bit kind of grating to go against the grain in that way, but I think it allowed me to sort of harness what I really wanted over time, which was great.
Thank you so much. Rhiannon, go ahead. Sorry,
I was going to say, I found in my experience, it's definitely not impossible to go without a graduate degree. I mean, I do not have a graduate degree. I actually have my orientation for my graduate program tomorrow. So I got hired just off my BA from Gettysburg, but I know that's relatively uncommon. We had to fill out bio sheets at work, so I stalked everyone else's bio to see how we all got here. And almost everyone above me, any job above me, they all have master's degrees. Most of my coworkers who are also program and grants assistants have master's degrees. I think there's only maybe a handful of us who don't. And the ones who don't tended to come from Peace Corps experience or other kinds of more academic experience or things like that. So I definitely would recommend it. I think it is a really big, helpful resume builder if you're looking at something like going into humanitarian aid.
Thank you. Noor, do you want to add anything?
Sure. So technically, to become a Foreign Service officer, you only need to be 21 years old and a U.S. citizen. There are no other formal requirements to take the test. However, you'll find that most people have very varying degrees. For example, one of my colleagues that I work with now has a PhD, but doesn't work in it with her job, but it definitely led her to deciding that she wanted to be a diplomat. Whereas if you're a fellow or you go through the fellowship route, you have to complete your master's degree at least in order to meet the prerequisites for that path into the Foreign Service. So it's quite a range. I don't have a graduate degree. I just applied with my Gettysburg BA and went through that way. But one of the things about working in the government is that there's these step tables. It's a formula. Everybody's salary is based on a formula that's public information. So if you want to enter government work with a higher salary at a higher grade, you need to have a graduate degree or the same number of years of experience that they decide. So a graduate degree in the table counts, I think, as 5 or 6 years of work experience. So it's not prohibitive in that way, but it definitely can impact where you land. And that's true across any federal position.
Thank you so much. That is so incredibly helpful, all the insight that you all shared. So now I'm going to switch gears a little bit to talk about your experiences at Gettysburg. I'm just wondering how minoring in peace and justice studies has helped you in your current career. Were there specific classes that you took that were especially helpful or programs that you were a part of? Emma, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll jump in. I think I joined the Peace and Justice Studies minor, that whole academic program, when it was very, very small. There were only 15 students in our minor at that point, which is insane to see how much it's grown since then. But at the time, it was rooted in the philosophy department. And I think that gave it a really unique sort of background looking at these types of, philosophical issues with that lens, because you're really grounded in the theory and the ideas, and it kind of teaches you to think abstractly and creatively. That's really what philosophy is about a lot of the time. And these issues really require really creative solutions. So I think that's been really helpful for me going forward. And then combining that kind of with like my master's degree, which is much more practical and skills based, was really helpful for me to see how both of those types of skills sort of transfer. Personally, the one class that really sort of impacted my minor the most would probably be Education for Social Change with Professor Williams. Not trying to, get on his good side right now, but it was definitely the class that sort of introduced and like ignited that passion for me. I always knew I had it, but it was that class that really showed me the types of all the different ways that I could go with it. I think looking at it from an educational perspective was really helpful because it showed me how much of an impact that education can have, whether that's teaching kids or educating college students. So I think just, it showed me that the power of just teaching education is really big. So that was my experience at Gettysburg and how it's really shaped, how I've gone since then.
Thank you so much. Would anybody else like to jump in about how minoring has helped them in their career or what their favorite class was?
Sure. So for those of you who don't know, I graduated from Gettysburg about 10 years ago, and I've only been in the Foreign Service for almost 2 years. So in that time, I had a bunch of different jobs at a bunch of different places, including the bulk of my career was in management consulting, mainly for corporate clients. And I always knew that I wanted to work in peace and justice and that I wanted a social justice element to every type of job that I had. And going through the Peace and Justice program at Gettysburg helped me to figure out how in any position I could always carry through peace and justice themes and like the lifestyle, regardless of who I was working for or in what capacity. So I definitely learning the formal way to care about things and learning how to carry them through in institutions helped me to have jobs working for big companies who didn't necessarily always align with my personal values or working on things that were otherwise uninteresting to me because I could bring peace and justice elements to that and eventually get the job that I was working towards, which, yeah, if that makes sense. So it can kind of help with everything.
Richard?
I would agree that having a peace and justice studies minor definitely does help with everything. Anything you get involved with law, going to law school and eventually becoming a lawyer. It's one of the things that they train you in law school is to look at everything from all points of view or all sides of the argument, basically. But it comes back to all points of view, and that was really something that I think had been a peace and justice studies minor. I was already in that mindset going already into law school. The classes I took, I was a year. I was 2012, so I was another year after Noor. So the classes that we had then were, I think I had one class with Professor Hancock that was, I forget the title of it, but it was a very interesting class where he definitely had a different view of a lot of things that I had never thought about before. And so I think that's the same sort of principles have definitely brought through into my career in law school and then to being a lawyer too. So I think it definitely is something that having the minor, it helps with anything and anything that you go into.
I would say for me, the most impactful part was I got a lot of great mentorship from Professor Ramnath. I had an interest that I was sort of starting to own when I came in the program around community and trauma and healing, the different ways that could look. And he encouraged me to study abroad in Durban, South Africa. And I ended up studying under one of the truth commissioners from the Truth and Reconciliation in South Africa in the last couple of years before he passed away. And that completely changed my life. I think I divide my life into before South Africa and after South Africa. And when I came back, he helped me sort of focus, or not focus, but figure out the different channels where that could work. And for me, I wanted to be working in low-income communities. I wanted to be working on anti-poverty work, and I wanted to look at places where the community collectively is experiencing something, that there's a lot of sort of power in that type of, I guess, close-knit situation to be developing solutions and bringing in investments. So that's taken me across a couple different career pathways, but having that sort of focus and core passion throughout has been really great.
Thank you so much. What advice, Rhiannon or David, would you give to your college self now looking back?
I think something I would tell myself is I was very hung up on the idea of I needed to take very specific classes. I needed to lay out a curriculum that was going to build very specific skills in me so that I would be able to step into a career. I felt like I needed to pick classes less so that were interesting to me and more so that fit this idea in my head of what like a government employee or something like that would need to know. And I wish I did get to take a lot of great classes that I found personally interesting, and I loved my time at Gettysburg and in the Peace and Justice Studies minor. But I do wish I had opened myself up a little to being able to take just a class in the English department that sounded interesting, or expanding my view academically a little bit like that, instead of just narrowly searching for classes that fit this preconceived notion I had of what I should be taking. And yeah, just expand like that. Take anything you're interested in.
Yeah, I think I would echo a lot of what Rhiannon just said in terms of taking classes that are interesting to you. For me, since I did an individual major in psychopathology, basically studying people who have personality disorders, so tacking on the few extra classes to get the Peace and Justice Studies minor kind of just made sense to me. But there are some classes at Gettysburg, I'm not even sure whether they're still offered, but there's a business law class that I took that I really liked. There's a lot of different ways to incorporate just kind of a pure sort of justice legal aspect to it. Studying abroad, I think, also really helps. Our way of training lawyers or educating lawyers is very different from how the Europeans do it. So if you go abroad and you take law classes with Europeans, they're in law school. So in that sense, you're already getting a law school class. You're getting to see what kind of the class setup is like, whether it's a more Socratic method than some of your other classes. You also get to learn about a number of differences that are there between the American legal system and even the UK legal system, which is very similar to ours, but especially some of the other European systems where they have a civil law system rather than a common law system. But yes, I would recommend taking classes that you like. At the end of the day, what law schools look at is grades. So don't try to do too much is another thing that I would say. I'm a workaholic, and overloading yourself and reducing your grades because of that is probably not the way you want to go if you want to go to law school. So that's what I would recommend. Don't overwork and do what you can to prepare yourself for the fire hose work that's law school.
Thank you so much. I'm just wondering, and Rhiannon and David, you both touched on this, but everybody else, what advice, or do you have any advice for students that are interested in your career field, and what skills are important or necessary to be successful in your career? We can start with Noor, and then we'll go to Rachael.
Okay. I think for any career, or at least in my experience with the different careers that I've had, time management is extremely important. So if that's a skill that you can develop while you're still in school and carry it forward, it makes a big difference to know how to take notes and organize them, to know how to prioritize when you have simultaneous things that are due at almost the same time, which ones you need to put your energy towards, and how and when to ask for support has been true in school and out of school for me. So I think that's a really important skill. To be a diplomat, a lot of people think that you need to know a foreign language before you start, but you don't. I think learning a foreign language helps in general because it makes your brain work in different ways, but it's not actually a requirement for the job. And once you get in, you have no say in where you go. So I'm currently stationed in Taiwan, And I happened to study abroad in China at Gettysburg, but that was 12 years before I applied. So I did not have any Mandarin skills left, and I didn't even list it as a language. And then I spent 9 months being taught Mandarin before they sent me here. So learning a foreign language is like great if that's a thing that you like to do and is something you're interested in, but you don't necessarily have to have a language in order to join the Foreign Service. And then another thing that I think is really important for every career is also the way that, like, being respectful in the way that you interact with people, because you'll just find that people are different and approach things differently. You could be looking at the same problem with 10 different people and everybody will have a different description of the same thing that you're looking at. And being able to communicate well and be respectful is extremely important in every job that you have, especially as you move into positions where maybe you are the supervisor of other people, or you're in a position where you are supposed to be helping someone else grow. It's important to be really respectful, communicative, and always remember what it was like when you felt disrespected, and make sure that you are doing things to avoid putting other people in those type of situations, especially in the workplace. And if anybody has questions about Foreign Service stuff, you can reach out to me anytime during this call or after or whenever.
Rachel, can you talk a little bit about the skills you need in order to be successful?
Yeah, sure. So in the community development world, I think there are a lot of different ladders into it. There are a number of people who get into it through either small nonprofits or community-based organizations that have really good pulses on what's going on in a particular community. And then there are sort of more hard skill paths, whether people go through architecture school or engineering school or urban planning and policy, are a little bit softer, but have some quantitative skills behind it too. So yeah, I guess it's kind of an interesting mix where there's no program or field that prepares you comprehensively. So beyond that, it's kind of a question of taking what skills you have and jumping in and figuring out how to apply them. So since I came out of policy school with a good quantitative background, and I knew affordable housing programs like the back of my hand, I could sort of use those to figure out, okay, what's going on with this architect, what's going on with this engineer, and figuring out how to sort of finesse those skills where you're lacking, because I think being able to come into a field where you're learn and always going to grow is just really sort of interesting as your career goes on.
Thank you so much. Richard, would you like to add on to that at all?
If you're going to go to law school and eventually become a lawyer, there's a lot of different skills. It really depends on the type of law that you go into. There are lawyers who never see a courtroom ever. They are doing something like working on real estate titles their whole career, or they're working on wills and trusts their whole career. But it all comes back to being able to communicate well. I think so. That's really a big skill that you need when you're looking towards a legal career. And then once you figure out what you want to do, it then becomes honing your skill set down to the specialty that you're going into. So that just comes back to being able to at least do some things, and then figuring out what you do well and going from there.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to add important skills that Okay, thank you. So we'll move on. I have like 2 more questions, and the last one I actually want to hear from all of you. So I want to make sure I'm saving time for that. But I'm just wondering, from your current positions, what roles do you think students can play in peace and justice fields in the future? And whoever wants to take that first, go ahead.
I can jump in. I think I'm in a unique position. I just graduated, and so I haven't really grown into the field yet. I still have, very beginning stages of my career, but I truly believe that like youth advocacy is, especially after the year of 2020, is going to be on the rise. And that comes with a lot of unique skills. I think media becomes such a unique type of sort of way to communicate social justice movements and messages. And I think that people of all ages, like having the skills to use those can be so helpful in the future. And it's such a pivotal way to organize that we've seen so many social justice movements use different types of media to do that, including Instagram. And I think that as young kids who know technology really well, that's something that we can contribute to a field of people that may not understand it the same way that we do. But personally, I think that just activism in general and getting involved in even smaller ways, it doesn't have to be something crazy like you go and work for the United Nations. It could be as simple as organizing within your family or your local community. So I think just capitalizing on the small ways that we can make a difference and using those skills that we kind of grew up with to sort of market ourselves is a fantastic way in which we can sort of play a role in peace and justice fields in the future.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any suggestions for ways that students can play a role in the field, or like even internships that are available for us to do something potentially right now? Us, I mean, current students. I still consider myself a student.
I'll jump into that. I've seen a number of facets of the sort of social justice field where people who are in really powerful positions don't have the background or the experience or the willingness to jump into what social justice actually really means in the lens of talking about privilege and talking about race and talking about how these things kind of didn't just happen because people had preferences and selected themselves. I think there's both a knowledge gap and a willingness gap in a lot of places for people to actually look like what it would to actually dismantle so many of our systems and the inequities that they really thrive off of. So I would say the more that people are coming into these types of fields and willing to speak up and speak out, the more sort of helpful it would be. I'm thinking about, I had a professor at Georgetown who has held a lot of high positions in the government and who had a lot of trigger points, especially when it came to race, where the couple students in the class who actually wanted to have those conversations to sort of twinge and would want to step up and talk about it, but it wasn't really the right place or the right time. Well, one can argue that it should always be the right place or the right time to do that, but I think being willing to have those conversations and bring them into leadership roles as people move up, we just need so much more of it.
I'm going to add on to what Rachel said, because I strongly agree that we don't wait to get involved in the things that you care about or to pursue a career or a passion that you feel like you're either not qualified or going to be too young or whatever it is. We need more people to join federal service, to join different fields so that we can move forward in the future. Like, I strongly believe that diplomats should represent the people in the US, and the diplomatic corps should look like the population of the US. And I think there are young people in the US who can provide a lot and who can contribute a lot, but are maybe waiting because they think they need to go to grad school or they think that they need to do whatever other things first. And I would encourage you to talk to people who have jobs that you think are interesting, to put yourself out there and not be afraid to try to make connections and learn how to get involved. I mean, there's internships everywhere, but there's also full jobs everywhere too. So don't feel like just because you haven't graduated yet or you're not totally sure what you want to do, it's never too early to get involved, and we need you to get involved. So don't be afraid and, put yourself out there.
David or Richard, do you have any suggestions in terms of like students getting involved through the lens of the law?
So going back to kind of one of the things that I said earlier is that, if there's a job where you don't like the title or you don't like the job description, if you prove yourself that you can do something that's above your title or your pay or whatever, if that's your way in, then that's your way in, and great. And I would suggest that you take it. It's not, I'm sure that Richard would echo the same thing, but it's going to be hard out there. With more people passing the bar, there's more competition for the same jobs. And especially with, less clientele, I guess, from a litigation standpoint, you're looking at a bottleneck of a lot of attorneys and not a lot of jobs. So I would, to current students, I would say, if there's a paralegal position opening up somewhere and you can do it remotely, then do it. Anytime that you can get your eyes on something that could eventually lead to a career, I would say go ahead and do it. Another thing is that, you have to kind of realize who you're going to be working for, and lawyers in particular, a lot of them have egos. They have a lot of personal pride, and so learning to be able to provide a good work product, even if it's not something you necessarily agree with, that's something that's also going to be important, because your boss doesn't really, they care about what you think, but at the end of the day, what they want is a good, solid work product. So anything that you can do to figure out what that looks like and figure out how to create it and then perfect it, that's what I would suggest doing.
Thank you so much. So the last question that I would like all of you to answer, and then I'll hand it over to the students to ask some questions. But what do you do to take care of yourself when your work or the state of the world is difficult and you need to process it? And we could start with whoever, and then if we could go around. While you all are thinking, I can share something that I started doing since the pandemic is I started to see a counselor regularly. And unfortunately, I can't see one in person, but I see one through BetterHelp. And it has really, really made a huge difference in my mental health. And I find that I'm developing better relationships and friendships with my peers, my coworkers, everyone, because I can get advice from my counselor and focus on having strong friendships with my friends instead of them having to, support me emotionally. So if anybody else, we'll have everyone share something that they do to take care of themselves.
I started building up a meditation practice at Gettysburg, and it has, for the last, about 10 years for me out of Gettysburg, has been a huge, not just coping mechanism, but way of sort of rewiring my internal world when it's in a lot of crisis or when it's doing great. I'm having trouble sort of seeing the big perspective and thinking about what type of emotional energy I actually want to be bringing. So I think that's been a thread which has been bringing a lot of grace through a lot of different times.
Rhiannon, do you want to share?
Sure. So something I've been working on, definitely, especially since the pandemic started, is I'm sure a lot of people here are like this too. I'm the kind of person who doesn't really feel like I can sit still. I don't like feeling like I'm being unproductive. I don't like feeling like I'm not constantly doing something useful. Like even if it's just doing chores, I like to feel like I'm constantly doing something, moving towards something. And something I've been trying to work on is sitting with being uncomfortable in doing nothing, and trying to become more comfortable with doing nothing, because it does, especially the kind of work I do, there are like real human consequences to our timelines. And it is something that, does give you this heavy heart sometimes and anxiety and things. And instead of just throwing myself into like the next thing to do, like I need to do the laundry now, or I need to do the dishes, or I want to start on my book, or different things like that, I'm trying now to learn how to take that anxiety and channel it, instead of ignoring it and doing other productive things, to take it and sit with it and do something that doesn't really matter, like playing Animal Crossing or doing something silly. And it is something that I think has definitely made me more useful in the times I am working, and definitely made me a calmer overall, I would say. So yeah, if anyone else is like me and you always feel like you're going and you would be uncomfortable to stop going, it is uncomfortable, but it definitely, it gets easier, and you will feel better when you are actually working, or even if it's not at work, you will feel better when you're working.
Thank you so much. Emma, would you care to share?
Sure. So I think a lot of this type of work can get really, really heavy. So for me, it's finding little tiny things that bring me a lot of joy. For me, that looks like going to Trader Joe's on the weekend and buying a new type of food that I've never tried before. It looks like buying a vase of flowers to put on my desk so that I get to look at while I'm working. It can be baking a new muffin recipe in my kitchen. But just finding those little things that bring you so much happiness and then consciously choosing to do them when you're feeling overwhelmed has been a big change for me, especially in 2020, just the tiny little things.
Thanks, Richard.
I would say along the same lines as Emma, it's finding things that you enjoy to do when you're not thinking about work or anything that's going on in the world too. I mean, that includes not doom scrolling through Twitter. So I think like a lot of times I enjoy going outside and just getting outside and going for walks. Even we have 2 dogs, so taking the dogs out for a walk, that kind of thing. But also even just thinking about something that has nothing to do with what you normally think about. So maybe that's looking into it, and sometimes it's reading a book or just getting into a different topic, even if it's something on the internet too, just that you're not thinking about what you normally think about. That's usually how I try and not think about things that are too stressful at the moment.
Thank you. Noor?
I have 2 main ways that I try to de-stress and process. So I really like to reconnect with my friends, especially because of the distance and the time difference and everything. I find that it's really helpful when I wake up in the morning feeling like there's something that I'm stressed about to call someone I haven't talked to in a long time and just catch up about all the not heavy things before you get into the heavy things. And I think seeing a familiar face and reconnecting with somebody that you know loves you and cares about you, even if they're not going through the same day-to-day with you, has been really helpful. So we try to make time, my husband and I try to make time almost every weekend to reconnect with people that we haven't seen or talked to. And that's really helpful. And the other thing that I started doing is listening to audiobooks as opposed to reading, because I found that it would feel like another task if I wanted to sit down and read. But now I can listen to the audiobook, even in the 3 minutes it takes me to get down the elevator, is something that's keeping my mind clear and, you know, listening to something interesting. And the last few books I listened to were really good. So I feel excited and re-energized about listening to books as opposed to like reading them.
Awesome. Thank you, David.
So I think my advice would go back to something Noor said a little bit earlier. You're not going to get any awards for working yourself to death. So definitely managing your workload and making sure it's a manageable thing where you can go to bed for 8 hours a night is really important. You know, especially when everybody's remote working, it can be difficult to get recognition for your work. And it's far better to do a manageable amount of work really well rather than doing an unmanageable amount of work and just getting it done. So that would be my suggestion on that front. I think a couple of other people mentioned it, just getting your mind active, but things that are not about work. So I like investing on the stock market, just doing the research, picking stocks and seeing where it is at the end of the month. Like I find that very interesting, and it's stimulating enough to where it distracts me from work. And, you know, you can kind of compartmentalize your time and your mental energies. And I also like playing video games too. I know somebody else mentioned Animal Crossing. I'm more of a Call of Duty person, but that also helps.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'm also loving this chat. I'm really appreciating everybody sharing the things that they do to take care of themselves. I think it's really, really important to take care of yourselves and talk about how you take care of yourselves and make time for it. So please continue flooding the chat with things that you do to take care of yourself. Sorry, I've gotten some questions, but because I'm getting chat messages, I need to go back to make sure I'm getting to them. Okay. Thank you so much to our amazing panelists. I really appreciate you answering all of my questions with such thoughtfulness and care. I'm now going to switch it over to students asking questions. I received a few messages in the chat, so I'm going to get started. Students, if you want to message me a question, or bring a question, please feel free. You could also come off mute and ask. So Laura Winters asked, as a senior, how can I make myself stand out in the application/interview process? Any important interview tips from the panel?
I've got some that might sound cliche, but they are noticed by people who do the interviewing. And it may be a little bit different on Zoom, but you need to make sure that you come looking prepared and feel prepared and look prepared, as in your clothes are clean, you didn't just wake up, you have put in some effort into what makes you feel confident, because that comes through, whether it's on Zoom or it's in person. You need to be prepared for your interviews, but also be natural. Don't feel like you have to memorize a script. Something that I've done for interviewing for jobs, but also for the exam process for the Foreign Service, is I made a list of 5 things that I'm really proud of that are professional and personal accomplishments. And I know how to talk about them, whatever the question is. So if somebody tells you, give me an example of a time where you demonstrated leadership, you should already know in the back of your mind, like things that you feel proud about being a leader for. And it doesn't need to necessarily be a traditional answer of like, I led whatever club. It can be something more abstract, but you should be practicing how to talk about the things that you are proud of and how to talk about the things that you feel like are accomplishments, regardless of the structure of the interview. So I literally wrote them down and then had flashcards where I would practice, okay, I led some community service events at Gettysburg that I really like to talk about because I'm so proud of them. How can I talk about them in a lens that's about not just community service, but organization and time management or working well with others or whatever the skill set is. So I would really recommend that in order to prepare for interviews, you know how to talk about yourself and you feel confident talking about yourself. And don't be ashamed to practice with your friends and your family and people who already know you so they can help you say, for example, you gave an answer and your friend might say, actually, I know that you did a really good job with your public speaking at that event, but you left that out of your answer. So make sure that you're practicing with people who can tell you what it sounds like to them so that it's reflected back in the way that you mean to.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry. I realized I wasn't on mute when I was typing. David, go right ahead. I'm so sorry for that, everyone.
Yeah, it's no problem. What Noor said is absolutely true. And another thing that I would definitely suggest is reading about the places that you're applying for and also understanding what the application process is and how it works. For a lot of these publicly posted federal government positions, they're automatically reviewed by kind of an active learning process. It's a computer automated process. So knowing that, you know, the length of your cover letter doesn't matter, knowing that there are certain keywords to include in your resume or in your cover letter, knowing about how the process works in addition to what you are applying for is something that's key. I would also go into any interview knowing enough to where you can relax and have a good conversation with your interviewers. You don't, you know, a lot of people get very nervous before interviews. They come off very stiff. But going in and being able to be comfortable in your preparation and in your application, that's really important.
Thank you so much. So I got some questions about working internationally and working as a diplomat. So the 2 questions that I got that I'll kind of combine, for those that work internationally and globally, how do you reconcile the power dynamics of being an American in the development or diplomacy fields? And then also, is there a creative way to be a diplomat, or are you tied to the US foreign agenda? And how has it been to work under Trump?
Okay, so like David, these are my personal views and I do not speak on behalf of the US government in this capacity. So you'll have to remind me of all the parts of the question. It's how to be creative in working as a diplomat. How do you work under the current administration and what
The power dynamics are.
The power dynamics of being an American. Okay. So these are complex and interesting questions that I think about literally every day of my life. And part of the reason why I wanted to be a diplomat and why I care so much about my job in a way that I didn't care about my other jobs is that, like I said before, the diplomatic corps should be representative of the US, and right now it's not. So in a lot of workspaces, I am the only brown person, I am the only woman, I am the only, a lot of different checkboxes in a lot of spaces that I enter, not just in the embassy, but in the State Department as a whole. And so I carry that with me in such a way that I want to make sure that I'm creating paths for other people to be there too. Like I might be the only one in some meetings right now, but I hope that as I move through my career, I can help create a path for more people to be there too, so that I hope in the next 10 years when we have these conversations, we're not necessarily talking about how bad the numbers are, we're talking about what else we can do to incorporate more people. So I try to be very conscious about that in how I work. And as an American, it's interesting in Taiwan because people in Taiwan have a very high standard of living, almost across the board, has the largest middle class of any country per capita. So people here are not impressed by me being American, right? Like I know that you can go to some places and then you have this unequal balance of power because people have this like romanticized version of Americanism or whatever, but that's not necessarily the case here. So it's also been humbling for people to be unimpressed or uninterested in the fact that I'm American or that I work at the American Institute here. So it's a little bit different, but I know what you mean in that sense of, you know, when I'm going through my life outside of work, I'm not interested, or I try to be intentional about not always mentioning where I work and what my job is, so that there is more of a balance and not making people feel like they have to act some sort of way just because of the title. So that's something that I'm still navigating and balancing here. But, you know, I definitely work with people who walk around and will flash their badge at a restaurant so that they don't have to wait in line or whatever. And like, that's not something that I'm going to do. And it's not something that I think people really should be doing. So it's also another dynamic is that my husband is white. So when we walk around, people think he's the diplomat and I'm not. So we have that issue in the embassy and outside of the embassy. So we've kind of developed a way to talk around, like moving the conversation to not be about my position and necessarily like identifying myself as a diplomat when I'm just trying to do normal things unrelated to my job. So I hope that kind of answers. I know that's like, there's a lot of layers there. As far as the administration goes, in my day-to-day job, I am directly impacted by the presidential proclamations. So whatever comes out of the administration changes how we apply the law based on how the laws change. And I fortunately have a boss that I really admire who helps us to think through what can we do within the parameters of whatever the parameters are. So whether that's this administration this week or a new administration in a month has a different regulations, at the end of the day, like my job is to carry out, you know, I carry out the law to the best of my ability in ways that are supposed to be about helping people. So part of my job, for example, is I manage the adoption portfolio. And I spend a lot of my time trying to help families get reunited, like help siblings get adopted together, but also making sure that children who have been in the system for too long or were adopted and returned because something didn't work out with the family situation, like prioritizing using the laws to help us to connect families and reunite people even in COVID, right? Like getting it so that people can fly to Taiwan to pick up the child that they've been waiting for. I get to do that with families, and I literally get to give them a piece of paper that says like, you're formally a family now and you can get on this plane together and come back. So within every context of like administrative changes or like the laws changing, I still have big elements of my job that I feel like truly help people and truly work in a peace and justice lens, if that makes sense. So like I said before I was a diplomat, I always tried to find a way to have a peace and justice and a social justice element to whatever my job was. So I was an IT consultant back in the day, and my job to me was really boring. I just typed characters into a field to make sure the enter key worked over and over again for hours, right? But in that, I was also able to create volunteering positions and like meet people at work who are also interested in fundraising for something, or like finding a way to use my passion that isn't necessarily tied to my job every day, if that makes sense. Does that answer the questions?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to hand it over to Richard. I got a question about law school. So are there any specific courses that students interested in preparing for law school should take? And then are there any courses that you found particularly helpful when planning for law school? So Richard, and then David, if you want to tag on to this as well.
A couple of classes, I would say, I don't know if they still offer them at Gettysburg, but there were some classes when I was there that were like law specific classes. If you take those now, you will know if you want to go to law school. So I would definitely recommend them if they are still offered. But I would also recommend creative writing. Writing is a big aspect of law school, and then also being a lawyer as well. So it definitely was a class that I took creative writing at some point, and it definitely helped to thinking outside the box when you're writing. So I think that was the biggest helpful part about that class. But then I think this was mentioned earlier too. I think a couple of people said too, but just taking a class just for you also before you leave Gettysburg is definitely the way to go too. And if it's something you're not used to being in, that's honestly the most helpful thing when you're thinking about law school and the law is just being outside your comfort zone. So would recommend doing that before you leave too.
Yeah, as Richard said, any writing classes are going to be very helpful in terms of creating a career in the field. All of what I do is writing. There are some occasions where I'm speaking, but day to day is writing. So that's very important. In terms of preparing for law school itself, I think the professor is probably more important than the class itself. Any class that offers sort of a Socratic, cold calling, on your toes sort of dynamic is something that you probably want to aim for. I'm not sure how many of the professors that I had when I was going through the minor are still there, but I know that there was a few professors when I was studying abroad in London that every class was cold calling, making sure that you knew enough or could fake it well enough to show that you can think on your feet and prepare what sound like cogent and coherent answers to any sort of question, even if you're not entirely prepared for it. So yeah, I would recommend in terms of preparing for law school to take classes that are like that.
Thank you, everybody, so much. I don't think we have any questions. I think I got all of them from the chat. If anybody else has any additional questions, you can feel free to come off mute if I missed something that you sent to me. Bryn, did you get any questions?
Nope, no questions. So.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to hand it over to Bryn in a second, but thank you all so much. Thank you to our wonderful panelists. This is like the teacher in me sending you lots of shine. As a recent alum, I learned so much from you, and it gave me so much to think about as I'm figuring out my career path. So thank you so much. And to the students, our panelists have been putting their emails in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, but also please feel free to reach out to our panelists. I'm sure they would love to help you. We also have a Peace and Justice Facebook networking page. I'll send that in the chat right now. Let me just grab that link and I'm going to hand it over to Bryn. Thank you all so much.
Thanks to all of our panelists again. It was really great to hear from you all. I'm still trying to figure out what I'm doing in my life too, so it was really nice to hear how Peace and Justice has helped you guys with your careers. And thanks to everybody who joined us today just to listen in. Tomorrow at 2 to 2:30 will be the last event of the Peace and Justice Week, where we will announce the winner of the TikTok challenge. So be sure to join us for that. And then on Sunday at 7 p.m., we are teaming up with the Children's Choir and Dr. Talbot for the final event of P&J Week. So yep, Dr. Williams just sent that in the link in the chat. So feel free to join us for that too. It'd be great to see you there.
I just want to say thank you to Christina, Richard, Rachael, Rhiannon, Noor, David, Emma. Thank you so much for giving of your time to the students. What you have shared here, I have learned stuff as well that I will pass on to students, and it has also reaffirmed some things that I tell students when they think I'm being a hard ass in the classroom. So thank you so much. And thank you, students, for coming. And we'll see all of you soon. Stay safe. Much love to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.